Okay, so David, maybe we can start with you. You've been around for a day or two.
Sure.
So, we're doing smart contracts. This is new. Let's be honest. In the past, there's been some resistance to smart contracts within the, both the Stellar ecosystem and, internally at the SDF. So, what are your thoughts about this? How did we arrive here? Is everything going to blow up in our face?
No, I don't think things are going to blow up in our face. I think it's kind of funny that we're building a new smart contract system from scratch, and basically it's being built by a lot of people who were kind of skeptical of smart contracts. But I think that's a good thing. It's a kind of a weird. It was weirdly uncontroversial. I would say there was kind of been a mixture of disappointment and excitement, and that we're kind of disappointed that we didn't get it right, from the start, right? And we like simple things, and smart contracts are going to, add a lot of complexity and a few new challenges. But there's excitement that kind of we feel we're up to it, and that we're like, the pace at which we've been developing this thing is just really exciting. It's certainly, in terms of getting it right, there's no better way to get signal from the community than like seeing what kind of smart contracts people are building. So I think it's just going to be really, really useful in terms of not just what people can do in fulfilling our mission of equitable access and allowing everyone to program to the same APIs, but also kind of learning more about what we should be doing so we can do it faster.
I think it's important to stress when I first started, so this is 3.5 years ago, it was, we don't need smart contracts. It's crazy, all those people out there who think smart contracts are required. And so I want to stress what David said, which is that when we started talking about this, getting a lot of feedback from the ecosystem, a lot of our internal developers were like, we don't need smart contracts. Like, why do we need that on Stellar? We kind of can do everything we need to do. And so it's been a progression, and it's been so awesome to work with the team to get them to the place where, they just moved so fast with input from the ecosystem. But it's just been like it's kind of the fastest thing that we've developed, I think, and really thinking through the language and thinking through how we were going to do it and how we were going to put it together. It's just been so fun to be a part of.
The other thing that's really neat is just having this kind of second mover advantage, right? If we were doing this in 2015 or something, we wouldn't really know a lot about what's the right way to do. But we can look at other people's mistakes. We can learn a lot from what other people have done, and that can save and we don't have any constraints in backwards compatibility, so we don't have to like make our thing dirty because we have all this like legacy code to deal with. So that also is exciting, the ability to kind of start fresh.
Awesome. And people should check out, we have a blog post on the origins of Project Jump Cannon and kind of like why now. I've heard from I heard from sources that even Ripple had internal discussions about that blog post.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, Toma wrote it with help from others. It's really actually quite good, and it does talk about the history of it. I think it's also important to know that this doesn't mean that Stellar Classic isn't important, because it still is, and it is trying to preserve what we've already built and what's going exceptionally well for us from the payment standpoint, and making sure that we protect that in terms of fees and keep the fees low there, but then also allow this new landscape where developers can build and create without any there's no parameters, right? You can just do whatever it is that you want to do. That's just such an important thing. And one of the things that we've been missing for a long time, I think, and it's in the origin story, but it's part of the need for us to be able to have lots more folks come and just develop and engage with the code base, with the ecosystem. So this is what I think is going to be exciting to see.
Yeah, and if it wasn't clear from the presentation, we are building on existing Stellar assets, so all the existing anchors, on and off ramps, custodial solutions, exchanges, all of this ecosystem is already baked into Soroban. Let's talk a bit about Sorobanathon First Light. Any thoughts about that, Danelle?
I love the name. I can't remember who came up with it, but it's a really great name. And was it Tyler? I think it was Tyler.
I think it was the DevRel team.
Yeah, DevRel team. Yay, DevRel team. Good job, guys. The need to have, look, the truth of the matter is to get new folks to be able to come to the ecosystem and to build and to create and to grow, it's worth it to put up $100 million to be able to do that. I love the staging of it. Really, we need to get the tinkerers, the folks that are going to help us write things about it, the folks that are going to like really poke at it and determine if it's useful to them. We hope it is. This is all what we want to do, and have it staged, and we're going to provide more information about what that staging looks like in terms of how that, it's going to be different kinds of groupings of, similar to the bounty program that we did for the bridge bounty, so some different kinds of groupings for that. I think it's a really important thing to do. As I said, one of the things that we were missing is this even more developers coming and being creative and developing on Stellar, and this, I think, is going to be a way to be able to deliver that. So $100 million is a really good enticement to get people to do that kind of thing. We don't think you need that enticement, by the way. It's so awesome without that $100 million. It's just an added bit of sugar.
David, I wanted to ask you a bit about scalability. I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart. How do you see scalability in the context of Soroban?
I mean, I think there's some more. I think we kind of just figured out how to make Stellar Classic in the DEX super scalable, and there are going to be, the fact that we're doing the smart contracts brings in a whole bunch of other challenges, right? So we're lucky in that, we have the benefit of hindsight. We're doing this in 2022, so we know that the smart contracts themselves need to execute concurrently, but that doesn't mean that you could, say, build a concurrent DEX necessarily as a Soroban smart contract. So I think what's going to be important is, and what's still somewhat up in the air, and like maybe the three of us might predict differently, is what's going to be the, sort of 5 years from now, the relationship between Soroban and Stellar Classic. But one thing that, I really, really, want us to continue being is the leader in kind of low-cost transactions, right? I think that one of the things that I think is unique about Stellar is we've been kind of maybe like ambitious in our realism all along. We're not trying to reinvent money and get rid of dollars and change how government works or whatever. We want to make it possible to send 50 cents to Mexico, right? And so I think that if it turns out that we need to still have Stellar Classic in 5 years, because what happens is we see people prototype things on Soroban, and then we re-implement them in Classic to make them more efficient, then we'll do that. Or we'll figure out how to make Classic, fast enough, and then maybe we can deprecate, make a Soroban fast enough, and we'll learn how to implement, maybe we'll have smart contracts that themselves have internal concurrency. I mean, that's kind of scary, because how do you make that deterministic? But one way or another, I think we're committed to ensuring really low-cost transactions.
And I want to say that every time I'm in a meeting with David, maybe not every time, but almost every time, we talk about scalability. It is a thing that it's on David's mind constantly, which I think is awesome for the network and for, we don't have all of the answers, but I think it's good for us to constantly be thinking about that. And the other thing that I love, and this goes credit to you, is the Stellar Consensus Protocol actually, it's perfect for this, right? There's no incentives to get fees to be higher. So people always say, and I think we even had a question yesterday around, do we think about ways that we need to be able to get validators to have compensation or some kind of fee rewards for performing the validation on the network? But this is part of the reason why it's important that they don't. Because there's no incentive in the smart contract world to have fees be higher, which means fees are always going to stay low. Now, it doesn't mean that we can always improve upon this and think about what we can do for validators and how we can bring validators in and why they should be there. David has a view. But I think it's important to understand the beauty of the Stellar Consensus Protocol and why that it really creates this perfect world to be able to have smart contracts and Stellar Classic and to not need to worry about those incentives. The incentives are all aligned.
And just a gratuitous plug that I will be giving a talk at 1 p.m. in the stage next door called Agreement is Its Own Incentive. So if you think this is controversial or whatever, come argue with me. I've got plenty of time afterwards for questions.
He likes to argue.
I just want to go back to your point before about Stellar Classic, and one thing that might require some clarification because Stellar Classic is a bit of a contentious term is that when we talk about Stellar Classic, we're talking about the set of existing operations on the Stellar network, that 20-something operations that we all know and love. These operations are not going anywhere, so you're still able to execute payments and path payments and set configuration and all of these great things and put orders on the existing decks. With that said, the Soroban transactions, you can think of it as like two execution lanes. So every transaction that is being processed is being put either into the existing set of operations or into Soroban. And that way, there's a specific like lot for each of these in the transaction sets, which ensures that the smart transactions or the Soroban transactions don't clog up the network, and payments and cross-border payments can still work.
This has been my favorite thing that's happened on the dev channel with respect to lots of stuff around Soroban, is that there's been so much communication from folks in the ecosystem. That's what we want to see, and so we're already starting to see that happen. One of my favorite areas, Tomer mentioned it, is the state and state archiving and state exploration and how that's going to work. And I think that there is a really nice thing to have the benefit of what everybody else is already doing out there in the world, and then to think about, well, how could we make that better? And there's this thing when you build something new, it doesn't always have to be better, but it needs to be as good as and run very efficiently. But this is an opportunity to really sort of change the dynamic, especially with the state archives. So I encourage all of you to really join those conversations and to think about it. One of the things that we know is that more people providing more ideas into this is actually the way that we make things better. So there's that, and there are so many other issues that I think that maybe historically we at SDF have been a little bit more reticent to be able to talk publicly about something that we're working on until we sort of have our plan or an idea around it. And I want us to not do that. I want us to actually put questions out and to really think and get your opinions and your ideas about how we could do things, because again, it's nice to have the beauty of an ecosystem that can help us to make things right.
Do you have anything you want to add, or should we ask the crowd to ask some questions?
Let's take questions.
Let's take questions. Is there the gentleman in the front? Just a second, we're going to get a mic over to you.
Hi. I just wondered, the cliches with great power comes great responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to open up developer ability for smart contracts. Do you think the SDF can be also pushing investment into how developers stay within financial regs? So, for example, if you have 100 million into the development of smart contracts and making sure that there's integrity there, what about with the kind of legal constructs that we're using as organizations? Because if there was some support in ensuring that we're all staying within financial regs, it gives us more power as a community to stay squeaky clean, and I just think that's good for the reputation of ourselves as a blockchain community.
So one of the things that's important is anytime that we give a grant, which this would be one, or do bounty, we actually have to be very careful about that. We need to know a lot about the organization. I don't know if any folks were here yesterday when Alex was talking about like KYB and know your business, know your customer. We need to do a lot of that. So there's going to be, we are trying not to be opinionated about what people do on Soroban. I think that's really important. We did have discussions internally and maybe some externally about how opinionated we should be about what should be built. And the truth is, that's really not, I'm deep in the open web and deep in like allowing developers to come together. And so I have a view that we shouldn't actually be opinionated around that. But when you're getting any kind of support from the SDF, we can be opinionated about what it is that we choose to support. So there will be those mechanisms that come into play. Some of you might hate it, but that's just the way it has to be when you're taking money from an organization like ours.
Gentleman in the back.
Hello, this is Patrick Manning from Mavenet. We're very excited about Soroban. I told Mary we talked about it yesterday. Could you share some more information about your roadmap for go live and after?
I'm going to have Tomer share that because if I do, it would have been live already in December this year. So,
No pressure. And she's my boss. So in terms of mainnet launch, we're aiming for the first half of next year, so Q2 2023. We're going to put out a set of FutureNet instances between now and then. And the idea of these FutureNets is that they have these incentivized testnet programs. So right now, there's Sorobonathon First Light. I imagine we're going to have probably Sorobonathon Stellar Community Fund style program, Sorobonathon Investment Program. So we're still figuring these out and planning accordingly. So there's definitely more to come.
we will have more of a detailed roadmap for you with respect to certainly the Sorobonathon, but also just in terms of what that first tranche of next year looks like. Any questions?
Good morning. Does it work? Yeah. Question is about legal side of things, because being an old-timer, I've been in this business a long time, especially on the commodity side. And I remember 2018, we had this talk with various legal advisories in London. And the consensus was at the time, smart contracts are not smart and they are not contracts. So we have plenty of legal issues with that, because it has implications, especially with international business between, for instance, China, Africa. That's a really difficult thing for us. Just for you to know, to be aware of that legal implication of contracts. Yeah.
Do you mean that the different kinds of parties that are coming in?
Yeah. What
well,
it means.
I mean, listen, smart contracts developers have to understand that there are challenges with respect to some of that, and that's part of the beauty and the opportunity and, of course, the risk of any of these things. So, yeah, people need to think about that as they're developing, for sure.
I mean, one of the things that's sort of come up in developer discussions is, should we gate smart contracts and kind of, approve only certain ones of them? And, personally, I would say, and I think many of us are against that, because we feel it goes against the kind of our core mission, which is equitable access. What kind of equitable access are we providing if, only a handful of developers can write smart contracts that get approved? That said, I think that people who are developing wallets and other UIs should be thinking about this question, right? And there's no reason that we can't have reputation systems and various third parties who are kind of deciding which smart contracts are and are not sketchy. And I think we need to be very careful about things like consumer protection, for example, and making sure people don't get sucked in by scam contracts. And so that can still be done, but it can be done by sort of wallets. And we can, maybe it's the kind of thing where we could help develop standards for third parties to establish reputations about smart contracts.
Yeah, I do love that. Like, the idea is that the SDF is not going to be opinionated about these kinds of things, but certainly we think other people should be opinionated about how they're going to push this out to their consumers and the folks that are using their products. So right. These are important.
Nor should it be like the core validators, like the tier 1 validators, right? I mean, if you build a reputation system and it turns out that the people who should be vetting smart contracts are exactly the tier 1 validators, then the reputation system can accommodate that. But we shouldn't assume ahead of time that people who are competent to run a validator are also the people who are competent to be, auditing smart contracts.
Someone over here.
Hey, you guys talked a lot about fees in that whole introduction to Soroban. Have you guys thought about having significantly higher base fees for the actual Soroban environment, given that in other smart contract environments and other chains, we're kind of seeing that the correlation between fees and actual block space demand doesn't hold below a certain level of smart contract fees?
Yeah, so fees are going to be multidimensional in Soroban and based on a set of parameters from compute to read writes to how much state you're storing. One thing we learned from the base reserve in the classic protocol is that we're not sure it works, to be quite honest. I think we're seeing a lot of claimable balances spam right now on the network, which suggests that people are just like writing the base reserve off as like, you know, transaction fees rather than base reserve. So the question is, how high can you go with base reserve and still make the network usable? So with Soroban, we're taking some different approaches, and in terms of state, we're building on state expiration and archiving. So it's going to be a fairly different system.
Hi guys, wondering if you could touch on the hardware, storage, validator, number of validators for FutureNet and mainnet.
Sure. So Soroban is built into the existing Stellar tech stack and ecosystem. Nothing changes in terms of the consensus protocol. Nothing changes in the overlay. So all kind of like the lower stacks are the same. And then in the application level, basically you have these like two execution routes. One that goes through the existing set of operations and one that goes through Soroban smart contracts. Now, we are building the smart execution layer to be efficient enough so that in terms of hardware requirements, it doesn't actually introduce any change to the hardware requirements required by validators because A, smart contracts are very optimized. B, we have the ability to run them concurrently, baked right into the kind of like the building blocks. And C, it's going to be a lot more limited block space than your regular Stellar operations. So, you know, if you're going to mint an NFT, or if you're going to do anything that takes up a lot of space, or if you're going to do anything that takes up a lot of compute, that is going to be a much, like the block size is going to have like a much smaller allotment for these style of transactions.
That was an important part, that we don't have to, that we can leverage the existing network versus have to do two separate. That was important. Just a few more questions. We're over time, but we're going to do this because we want to hear from you.
Good morning. I'm not a developer, I'm just a lay person. I'm curious, down the road, is the average person going to be writing their own smart contracts, say, with a friend to wager on a sports bet or to pay a contractor, hold some money in escrow, or is this always something that's kind of happen in the background, or say still with developers or attorneys?
No, I don't think so.
No,
I mean,
you don't.
Even independent of smart contracts, you know, I've often thought that like many of our success scenarios involve most people using Stellar either not knowing that they're using Stellar, or it's like an Intel inside sticker. They don't really know what it means. So I think that goes even more so for smart contracts, right? But it's an important safety valve to make sure that people who have good ideas can innovate, right? And we want to make sure that nobody's gatekeeping the good ideas from getting deployed.
Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that like smart contracts is a bit of a misnomer. Like it doesn't always, it's not equivalent to necessarily like a legal contract. When we say smart contract, we're talking about these pieces of code that are executed in a decentralized way where there's no centralized party that oversees their execution.
If there is a catastrophic incident on Soroban, like a hack or a lot of funds lost, is there a governance model for rolling things back? And will you have to roll back Stellar Classic if that happens?
This is an interesting question, and I'm actually going to touch on this in my talk because there's analogies in terms of what happened with Ethereum. What's sort of nice is that the Stellar Consensus Protocol itself actually also has the governance model built in. And so this is the way this would be handled if like really everybody believes that something happened that's so unfortunate that we need to kind of change the rules, is then there would be a protocol upgrade that the validators would vote on, and the upgrade would, you know, have a weird thing that like rolls back a transaction, you know. Let's hope that, you know, we've managed to build Soroban in a way that it doesn't have the same kinds of pitfalls, like the reentrancy problems that happen with Ethereum, and that will avoid that.
So just to add to David's answer, we do have a kill switch for Soroban. With that said, we don't have any rollback mechanism, or we haven't introduced anything yet. I think that with specific contracts and specific protocols, there will be an ecosystem effort to build these mechanisms right into the protocols themselves. But I think we need to be very careful about anything that we introduce beyond just the governance provided by SCP.
I want to ask, there are many smart contracts, and you mentioned Ripple because they are also working right now on like smart contracts, and I wanted to know what is the difference between Soroban, because they mentioned they wanted also be partners of that.
Yeah, so I'm not going to comment on another company specifically, because I think that company specifically has a lot of different efforts around it. I will mention that the way that Soroban is different from other networks that are retrofitting smart contracts is that with Soroban, we've really taken a step back and built a platform that is kind of like powerful, and it's powerful independent of Stellar. So when we built Soroban, or we started building it, the design criteria is we don't want to be held back by the current Stellar protocol. And what we're seeing with a lot of other blockchains, or some other blockchains that are retrofitting smart contracts, is that they're getting bogged down by introducing the smart contracts really deep into the existing transaction system. Which is really disabling when you're trying to build something that is Turing complete. So I think that with Soroban, we've taken like a really different approach, which is we're building something independent and then adding it to the existing transaction system, rather than trying to modify the existing transaction system.
Hello. You talked about built-in smart contracts. Have you thought about including new smart contracts or new smart contract standards in the future, like an upgrade of Soroban?
That's a great question. So, we're building smart contracts on WASM, WebAssembly. WebAssembly is this very simple specification. It's super standardized, supported on all major browsers. You've got a lot of implementations of it out there. So you can actually continue building on WASM. You can introduce different SDKs, like the assembly script SDK. We can introduce more and more host functionality. So for example, let's say there's a new cryptographic like elliptic curve that you want to use for signing, then we can add that very easily into in an additive way to the host. So the whole system is built in a very extensible way to facilitate those type of upgrades.
Which was purposeful, because that's not how Core is today. So we wanted to create that opportunity in Soroban land.
Hi. As a founder, how can I apply for the 100 million fund, and when?
You want the whole 100 million? I'm just kidding.
Just one. I got a project. They're looking for a chain, and I quite like it.
Yeah, it's a good question.
That's a great question. Go to soroban.stellar.org, and we already have instructions for Soroban First Light. Like I said, Soroban First Light is a very early tinker program to get some content out there. Later in the year, in the beginning of next year, we're going to announce some more programs that are like, more geared towards developer tools, protocols, and other products, decentralized apps built on Soroban. Go for it.
You can apply now, yes. Any more questions?
Okay, I think we're over time, and that was a great last question. Go to soroban.stellar.org. It will change your life.
Yay!